Hey everyone, I need you to imagine something for a second. You're a nurse in Queens. You've been taking the same train to your hospital shift for 15 years. Every morning, same routine, same platform, same commute. Friday night, you go to bed like any other night. Saturday morning, you wake up, grab your coffee, head to the station, and the train system you've counted on your entire adult life has just shut down. No warning, no backup plan, just gone. 250,000 people, just like you, all scrambling to figure out how to get to work on Monday morning. That's not a hypothetical scenario. That's exactly what happened this past weekend in New York, when the Long Island Railroad, North America's largest commuter rail system, went completely dark for the first time in over 30 years. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this strike wasn't just about a labor dispute. There's one number buried in this story that explains everything, and when you hear it, you'll realize this was never about the workers or the trains. This was about a system that's been breaking for years, and nobody in charge wanted to admit it. Now, you might say I don't live in New York, I don't use the LIRR. Trust me, the pattern playing out right now in New York is coming to a transit system near you. So hit that subscribe button because this one goes deep. Let's get into it. Let's set the scene with what actually happened, because the scale of this is easy to underestimate. Saturday, May 16th, 2026, 12:01 a.m. The Long Island Railroad shut down completely. Not delayed, not running limited service, shut down. 5 unions representing 3,500 workers, roughly half of the entire LIRR workforce, walked off the job after years of failed negotiations with the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. These weren't random employees. These were locomotive engineers, signalmen, machinists, electricians, and communications workers. The people who make the trains physically run. Without them, there are no trains. And here's what that actually meant on the ground. On a typical weekday, the LIRR carries more than 250,000 commuters. On Saturdays, 137,000. On Sundays, 112,000. Over the course of last year alone, the system moved 82 million passengers. That's the entire population of Germany riding this one rail system in a single year. When those workers walked out, every single one of those riders had to find another way. Drive into the city and deal with traffic that was already brutal. Take shuttle buses that the MTA scrambled to organize at the last minute. Work from home if their job allowed it, or just not go. And here's where it gets serious. This wasn't just commuters heading to office jobs. This was nurses trying to get to hospitals. This was airport workers trying to make their shifts at JFK and LaGuardia. This was students trying to get to final exams at colleges across Long Island. Stony Brook University warned families to expect a 30 to 40% increase in vehicle traffic on campus because of the strike. Hofstra held its graduation ceremonies right in the middle of the shutdown. Farmingdale State College told students to carpool during finals week. The New York State Department of Transportation deployed extra tow trucks, highway maintenance staff, and traffic signal technicians across Long Island just to prepare for the chaos. Governor Kathy Hochul stood in front of cameras on Sunday and said it plainly. Let's face the facts. It's impossible to fully replace LIRR service. She urged people to work from home on Monday if they could. But tens of thousands couldn't. And those people were left trying to navigate a transportation network that had just lost its backbone. Now here's what makes this so much bigger than one weekend of inconvenience. This strike didn't come out of nowhere. The workers who walked out hadn't received a raise since 2022. They'd been negotiating with the MTA since 2023. That's years of talks that went absolutely nowhere while the cost of living in New York kept climbing. And here's the part that should actually concern you. These workers aren't covered by the same labor laws as most American employees. LIRR workers fall under the Railway Labor Act of 1926, a federal law designed specifically to prevent exactly this kind of disruption by requiring elaborate dispute resolution before any strike can happen. That means mediation, cooling off periods, and even presidential emergency boards. In fact, the unions requested intervention from President Trump twice, once in September 2025 and again in January 2026. Trump ordered emergency boards both times to mediate and make recommendations. The second emergency board released its report on March 16th and extended the cooling off period by another 60 days. That deadline expired. The unions legally could strike as of May 16th. And they did. But here's what nobody in the media is connecting. The fact that this strike happened at all, despite every procedural roadblock designed to prevent it, tells you how badly the negotiations had broken down. This wasn't a rash decision. This was a last resort after every other mechanism failed. So what were they actually fighting over? Let's talk about the real issue because this is where the numbers get interesting. The union wanted a 5% pay increase in the final year of their contract. The MTA was willing to go as high as 4.5%. Half a percentage point. That's the gap that shut down the entire system. But it wasn't just about the raise. The MTA also wanted new hires to pay a higher share of their healthcare costs, roughly half of what the average New York State worker pays toward healthcare. Existing employees wouldn't be affected, just new workers coming in. The union said no, and here's why that matters. MTA Chair Janno Lieber said at a press conference that if the agency gave the union the full pay increase they were asking for, the MTA would have to either hike fares by 8% or cut jobs to avoid a deficit. He called the union's demands outsized wage increases far beyond what anyone else at the MTA is getting. He said these workers were already the highest paid in the system. The union shot back with a very different picture. Mark Wallace, president of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, said management refused to negotiate in good faith. He said the workers were simply asking for fair compensation after years of stagnant wages, while inflation eroded their purchasing power. And that's the tension. The MTA says it can't afford the raises without cutting services or raising fares. The union says the workers can't afford to keep living in New York without the raises. Neither side is wrong about the math. The problem is the math doesn't work for either of them. And that brings us to the part that should genuinely scare you, because this isn't just a New York problem. It's a preview. Here's what nobody in City Hall wants to talk about. The Long Island Railroad strike is a symptom of a much larger structural crisis playing out in American cities right now. Public transit systems across the country are running on budgets that haven't kept pace with the actual cost of operating. They're dealing with aging infrastructure that needs billions in repairs. They're facing labor forces that haven't seen meaningful wage growth in years, while housing costs, healthcare costs, and everyday expenses have skyrocketed. And they're caught in a political environment where raising taxes or fares is politically toxic, but cutting services is just as bad. So what happens? Nothing. The system limps along until something breaks. And in New York, what broke was the labor relationship. But let's zoom out for a second, because the human cost of this goes way beyond the weekend. Imagine you're one of those 250,000 daily commuters. You planned your entire life around the assumption that the train would be there. You bought a house in Long Island because you could afford it there and still commute to your job in Manhattan. Your kids go to school near your house. Your entire routine is built on that rail line. And then it just stops. You can't uproot your family overnight. You can't quit your job. You can't magically afford to move into the city. So you sit in traffic for 3 hours. You take a bus that's packed with hundreds of other people in the same situation. You miss work. You lose pay. You scramble. And the people making the decisions, the union leaders, the MTA executives, the governor, they're all negotiating while you're the one actually suffering the consequences. And here's the infuriating part. The strike ended Monday night. The MTA and the unions reached a tentative deal. Service started resuming Tuesday at noon with limited trains on 4 main branches. Full service was expected by the evening rush hour. The details of the agreement haven't been fully disclosed yet, but the fact that a deal came together after the strike started tells you something important. The pressure of actually shutting down the system forced both sides to move, which raises an obvious question. If they could find a deal on Monday night, why couldn't they find one on Friday? Why did 250,000 people have to spend a weekend in chaos before the people in charge decided to actually compromise? The answer is because neither side felt enough pain until the trains stopped running. The workers weren't getting raises either way, so they had nothing to lose by striking. The MTA wasn't facing a real crisis until the system actually shut down and the political heat became unbearable. It took the collapse to force the solution. And that's the problem. This wasn't a system designed to prevent a crisis. This was a system that required a crisis to function. Now let's talk about the number I mentioned at the beginning, the one that explains everything. The last time the Long Island Railroad went on strike was 1994. 30 years ago. 3 decades. That's an entire generation of commuters who had never experienced this. And here's what that tells you. For 30 years, the system worked just well enough to avoid a breaking point. Wages were negotiated. Contracts were signed. Trains kept running. But that 30-year streak didn't end because the workers suddenly became unreasonable or because the MTA suddenly became cheap. It ended because the underlying economics of running a public transit system in 2026 are fundamentally different than they were in 1994. In 1994, New York's cost of living was high, but it was manageable. A family could live in Long Island and get by on a working-class income. In 2026, that same family is getting priced out. In 1994, the MTA's budget challenges were real, but they weren't existential. In 2026, the agency is staring at deficits that require either massive fare hikes, service cuts, or both. The 30-year gap between strikes wasn't a sign that the system was working. It was a sign that the breaking point just hadn't arrived yet. And now it has. But this just isn't about New York. It's about you, because the same pattern is playing out in transit systems across the country. In Washington, D.C., the Metro has been cutting service and raising fares for years while ridership keeps dropping. In Chicago, the CTA is facing a massive budget shortfall and warned of service cuts if it doesn't get more funding. In San Francisco, BART workers have threatened strikes multiple times over similar wage and healthcare disputes. In Boston, the MBTA is dealing with aging infrastructure and a workforce that's underpaid relative to the cost of living in the city. The formula is the same everywhere. Aging systems, rising costs, stagnant funding, workers who can't afford to live where they work, and politicians who don't want to raise taxes or fares. So the systems decay. Services get worse. Workers get frustrated. And eventually, something breaks. New York just had its breaking point this weekend. But every other city with a major transit system is headed in the same direction. The only question is when. So let's bring this full circle. We started with a nurse in Queens who woke up Saturday morning and found out the train she'd been taking for 15 years had just disappeared. By Monday night, a deal was reached and the trains started running again. But here's the bottom line. The strike is over, but the problem isn't solved. The same budget pressures that made the MTA fight over 0.5 percentage point are still there. The same cost of living pressures that made the union walk out are still there. The same aging infrastructure that needs billions in investment is still there. A tentative labor deal doesn't fix any of that. It just kicks the problem down the road until the next contract negotiation. And the next time, the gap might be even wider. The political will to fund public transit might be even weaker. And the workers might be even less willing to wait. This strike was a warning. Not just for New York, but for every city that depends on mass transit to function. Because when the systems that millions of people rely on every single day are being held together by duct tape and political avoidance, eventually the tape gives out. And when it does, the people who suffer aren't the ones making the decisions. It's the nurse trying to get to her shift. It's the student trying to make it to her exam. It's the worker who built his entire life around a train that one day just isn't there anymore. So I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you live in a city with public transit? Have you seen the same warning signs? Are you watching the same pattern play out where you live? Let's talk about it because these conversations matter. And if this video opened your eyes to something you didn't see before, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories that actually affect your life. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop asking questions. I'll see you in the next one.